Do the kids have enough time to eat, or are they rushed? Do the kids serve themselves from a family-style table and dish? Are they being praised when they try new or healthy food? Do you use reason and education rather than bribes or threats when you're talking about eating? Do you check in and kind of vocalize that inner voice we want them to develop about hunger and fullness cues?
Welcome to Consistency Breeds Growth Radio. I am your host, Justin Romer. Our incredible guest and myself talk about the cutting-edge science and consistency necessary to reach your weight loss, wellness, and performance goals. If you have nutrition goals, we have customized nutrition programs and coaches that tell you how much, when, and what to eat for every single meal. And the best part? You don't need to calculate macros in an app. Ditch the calculators. Want to learn more about our intrinsic diet? Let one of our coaches know you listen to this podcast to get 10% off. Do you own a gym or attend a gym that wants to make some money and throw a top-notch nutrition challenge with a team of certified nutrition coaches? Our team will guide your members through a nutrition challenge customized for your gym. And you'll make money for each member who signs up. If you want more information about working with us one-on-one or in a gym setting, head over to consistencybreedsgrowth.com or email us at consistencybreedsgrowth@gmail.com. We will also put links in the show notes. Enjoy the podcast. All right, what's up, everybody? It's Justin here with CBG Radio. We're here to talk about health, fitness, and anything else related. And I have a special guest on today named Erin Comollo. She's going to be talking to us about a lot of things related to childhood obesity. But first, I want to tell you about our Consistency Breeds Growth Nutrition Gym program. So we are looking to team up with CrossFit gyms or personal trainers in the U.S. So if you're a gym that is thinking about fitness and not nutrition, then you're leaving a lot of potential on the table for your members, right? So if you want to hire a CBG coach specifically to help your members who have struggled with weight loss, health, or performance, we are here to help you. And the cost, that's the best part, $0, right? So we're looking to help your members. You don't have to pay anything to us. We're going to work with your members. They will pay for the nutrition coaching, and we will customize different marketing tools to make sure that people in your area know that your gym offers nutrition coaching. So if you're interested more in this program, please let us know. So Erin is on the podcast today. She is the Program Development Administrator for the New Jersey Healthy Kids Initiative and the Institute for Food, Nutrition, and Health at Rutgers University. She's a strong believer that nutrition plays a crucial role in children's physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development. As a former classroom teacher, Erin brings over 12 years of teaching and curriculum development expertise to the initiative. Additionally, Erin is a CrossFit Level 2 trainer and has her CrossFit Kids certification. She's worked with individuals, small groups, and children to develop healthy lifestyles that focus on fitness and nutrition. She received her undergraduate's degree in early childhood education and fine arts from the College of New Jersey, and her master's degree in early childhood education and supervision with the College of New Jersey as well. She's also completed her doctorate of education at Rutgers University Graduate School of Education with a concentration in teacher leadership, where she actually has did her doctoral dissertation on the study focused on the outcomes of introducing and implementing a teacher professional development program within a school. So Dr. Erin Comollo, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Justin. How are you?
I'm doing excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, so you have a pretty extensive background, obviously working with children and understanding a lot of the issues that United States is facing in terms of childhood obesity. So I'd love to start with, what is the current state of childhood obesity in the United States today?
Yeah, it's a great question and good timing because recently in October, there was a new release of statistics relating to childhood obesity found by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And this is also backed by the National Survey of Children's Health. Roughly 1 in 7 children in the U.S. ages 10 to 17, or about 15.5%, have obesity, which is pretty crazy if you think about that 1 in 7. And I think there's even more statistics coming out about what's happening now with COVID and how that is impacting those statistics. But as of 2018, 2019, those were the current stats.
Yeah. So that's a pretty significant number of children that are facing a lot of these issues as it relates to obesity. I know me in particular, I was overweight as a child, and there's a lot of literature out there now within nutritional science that indicates that children that are overweight as young adults are more likely to experience weight gain later on in life, more likely to experience the symptoms of hyperinsulinemia and diabetes, and other comorbidities that we know that America is facing right now as an epidemic, right? So I think our genes and a lot of the things that our bodies undergo as a child are, still living with us as we grow older and older and older, right? So this is not something like, okay, your child is, or some children in the U.S. are experiencing, just being overweight, but they're likely experiencing symptoms later on in life as a result of the foods that they were eating and selecting from when they were small, right?
Absolutely. And, the scary thing is that we do call this kind of a epidemic, the childhood obesity epidemic. Like you said, childhood obesity is one of the biggest precursors or predeterminants for whether or not you're going to have a chronic disease later in life. And these chronic diseases are our number one causes of death in the U.S. So like you mentioned, diabetes, cardiovascular, and cancer. And all of those can really be mitigated through early intervention, early in life, building those healthy habits. To kind of speak to your point about, the things we do as kids are in our genetics, later get carried out based on our behaviors. I heard a really great saying that our genes or our DNA is like the loaded gun, but our choices, our behaviors, our environment are what pulled the trigger. So like you said, it's a combination of these things that we're predisposed to, and then also our behaviors and actions that will help determine the future trajectory of our health.
Right. Yeah, it's really that intersection between the genes we're born with and our epigenetics, which are the genes that are altered over time based on our actions, our environment, and other things like that. Definitely huge emerging fields in nutrigenomics and things like that for us to better understand that stuff. But to put it simply, we have to find better ways for kids, children in schools, and even at home to make good food choices to make sure that their weight is staying manageable. And this includes both children and teens. I do a nutrition seminar typically when we run nutrition gym challenges. And I always make this comparison, like what's the number one cause of death in the United States? And it's heart disease, right? Which is directly correlated, as you mentioned, to obesity, right? And then I ask people, what's the 273rd cause of death in the United States? And no one can answer the question, right? But it's actually spiders, right? And yeah, so the reason that I make this sort of connection is because people are more afraid of spiders than they are McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
And people are actually more likely to probably see a spider and have a heart attack, which is the number one cause, than to actually be afraid to pull into McDonald's, right, on a consistent basis. So it's it's a slow killer for most Americans, right? Like some Americans can live pretty late in life, 50s, 60s and being overweight, right? So people don't take it seriously until, they find out that they have particular complications. So at least the same thing that comes up for me when I talk about COVID with people is like the easiest way to combat this virus was from the beginning. And it's the same thing when it comes to obesity in children, right? So why do you think this has become such a problem for children and teens in the U.S.?
So it's a combination of factors. A huge factor in it is certainly the foods. You mentioned McDonald's that we eat outside of the home. Portion sizes and caloric density of foods have increased as food science has evolved and developed. And, in some cases, has evolved as a result of making food more accessible and affordable. There's also that flip side of making energy dense, cheap, non-nutritious foods available and plentiful and in large portions. So that's one. Also, kids have a lot less physical activity. There's so much more screen time. I think not just for kids, adults. I think we've all experienced that, especially during COVID. So again, I think there are some really interesting and scary implications of what this experience, the pandemic, has done for overall health and child health in particular. Neighborhoods that don't offer safe spaces for play or walking, so lack of sidewalks or green spaces or parks. And then like the school environment. So I know even as a teacher, I can attest that academics came first in certain settings that I was in. And, if you didn't get something done, it was going to come out of the recess time. Or, if there wasn't a gym teacher or if it was raining, they probably weren't going to get their actual gym or vigorous physical activity time during the day. So I think, priorities in education and child rearing have shifted, where you may have had an actual physical human being interacting with your kids, doing things where they're moving at home. A screen has become a babysitter. So I think those are huge contributors. And then we can't overlook some of the social determinants of health as well. In those statistics of obesity rates, we have higher incidences of obesity in Black and Hispanic populations. So it's 22.9% of Black children ages 10 to 17 are obese or overweight, and 20.7% in Hispanic populations. So, it also leads you to think that while there are these environmental and behavioral factors, there are also these structural racial inequities that are impacting on top of those other factors. So sometimes it does feel like, a little bit like we talked about the genetics and then the epigenetics, and then layered on top of that is the environment. So I think that's a huge deal, as well as putting those both together, the issue of food insecurity. And then that kind of goes back to those social determinants of health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I resonate with that a lot. I think that you hit it right on the nose. When you said that you basically have these calorically dense foods being foods that have a large amount of calories in them to improve the hunger issues. And those hunger issues have now been resolved, right? So now that they've been resolved, we have all these higher calorie foods and that are very affordable, and that's affecting obviously lower income areas, which we know there are a lot of racial disparities in these lower income areas, right? So I think that is a huge thing that the United States is facing. Can you explain what food insecurity actually is?
Sure. So food insecurity is basically, they now do actually screening in many pediatric settings. Basically, do you worry about where your next meal will come from, or that you'll be able to afford your next meal? It's basically as simple as that. And food insecurity can come from anywhere due to financial issues, but it's also linked to things such as food deserts. So perhaps you live in an area where access to healthy food is very scarce or hard to get to. Maybe you don't have transportation to get to somewhere that has healthy food access, or there's even a term food swamps, where perhaps you live in an area where there are ample opportunities for food, but they are all McDonald's or local bodegas or 7-Elevens, where you're just getting these packaged calorie-dense foods. And this is kind of what we talk about when we say there's the double burden of malnutrition, like you said. It's this combination of being overweight and obese, yet still suffering from undernutrition. You could be eating a lot of calories, but not a lot of nutrients. And the scary thing is that's what typically occurs in food insecure populations. And in the U.S., there's about 14 million children who are food insecure. And going back to those racial disparities, that means about 3 out of 10 Black households, 1 out of 4 Hispanic households, and that's in comparison to only 1 in 10 white households that are food insecure. So, a lot of it has to do with socioeconomics and development planning, really.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that it's important to note that just because, like you said, you're getting in a lot of calories doesn't mean that you're actually getting in the required amount of nutrients for your metabolism to stay in a good position, right? Or to support weight loss.
Exactly.
Like there are a lot of vitamins and minerals that we get from vegetables and fruits and things like that ultimately help improve our gut microbiota, that help make sure we have a good metabolic rate so that we can support exercise and activity. And if you're eating foods that just are calorically dense and don't have those things, you're likely to become really lethargic, hyponatremic, which is the lack of necessary micronutrients that you need to support longevity and long-term health. So even though, like I said, we've solved that hunger issue, we now have other I think I've seen a statistic that the obesity rate has now, just the obesity number in general, not the rate itself, has now surpassed that of world hunger.
Wow.
Yeah, which is insane, right? So we have no shortage of food,
right,
as compared to some of the other, problems that we're facing, especially when it comes to these racial disparities and socioeconomic issues that some of these households in general, which obviously affects children directly. So you are actually the program development administrator for the New Jersey Health and Kids Initiative, right, at Rutgers University. So what is New Jersey Health and Kids doing to help determine and aid in a response to this epidemic of childhood obesity?
Great question. So our initiative is really 3 different arms that we were tasked to do to help build a culture of health from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who funded us. The first was to really build a robust community advisory board and scientific advisory board so that we're engaging stakeholder voices, making sure that we're using best practices and up-to-date science, and really collaborating with others who are interested in this field. The second was to take all that we're learning, take what all researchers are doing in the field, and put it out there for other academics, practitioners, community members to engage with. So we host a symposia series. We've hosted 5 so far, and they've ranged on everything from childhood nutrition to systems data and how can we use a systems approach to child health. And then the last, as you alluded to, is my primary role, which is working with schools. And our goal is to help schools improve their policies, systems, and environments relating to nutrition, culinary literacy, and physical activity. And the reason that we really focus on those policy, systems, environments is because research has really shown that's the areas that you can inflect the most change. Programs are wonderful. Environment is wonderful. Systems in itself are wonderful. Policies, take a lot of work to get done, but can be very impactful. But it's really not until you tackle the 3 as a whole that you can really get systemic change. So one of the things that I do is I go into schools and I kind of conduct an audit along with some of my team members and some of our graduate students. And we'll take a look at each of the schools' policy, systems, and environments, and take a look at best practices and see where they line up with each other. And at that point, we're able to make some recommendations for the schools to see, where do they need improvements? What are they doing really strong that we could actually use as models for other schools? And then based on that, we'll help implement some of those changes. So maybe if they need help with policy writing, so we'll come up with some of these best practices and policies and help them develop some new policies to put in their handbooks, parent newsletters, etc. It could also be maybe they need teacher professional development. So we've hosted professional development for Highland Park School District in New Jersey, all of their high school health and phys ed teachers to come in and learn about how to assess their students for physical literacy, some of these basic fundamentals that a lot of phys ed programs miss, as well as healthy snacks and ways that they can incorporate cooking and nutrition into their health curriculum. And then we also do drop-in or fun field trips for kids to come to Rutgers, pre-COVID, to engage with either our kinesiology grad students, our nutrition students. So one of the big things that we want to do is work particularly with lower income schools who may not be able to afford some of these projects and implementations, which is why being able to fund things like field trips or guest visitors to come in and teach cooking in the schools is so important to our program.
Yeah, it's good to obviously take a multifaceted approach to this problem. It's a very complex problem. I think people don't realize how complex it is. So it's hard enough for us at CBG Online Sports to work with one person with nutrition coaching, right? Yep. And we have to make huge changes over time to their current nutritional program and the way that they currently think about foods. It's becoming more and more common now that we almost have to not only act as nutrition coaches, but work with them around the psychology around how they think about food.
Absolutely.
And things like that, which is crazy hard, right? Just to do with one person, right? And you're trying to tackle this systemic issue where people and families in general don't have the education around what good nutrition is, don't have the income around being able to prepare or the time around being able to prepare healthy meals, and then also the schools really not being educated and have the policies in place to make sure that good, high nutrient dense foods are being, offered at lunchtime. So I think when it comes to to schools in general, you guys have to continue to make some, connections with lower income schools in some of those communities and make sure that they have obviously what they need to offer good quality food. But at home, what can mothers and fathers and even kids be doing better to get healthier meals for breakfast and for dinner as opposed to what they're currently out there doing, which is either ordering out or packaged foods?
Great question. One of my favorite metaphors I just heard on a podcast with Ben Bergeron, actually. He said one of the issues that we have in health is that we have this disease approach to health, and he made a parallel that doctors or medical professionals are kind of like lifeguards in a situation. And what we really need is a swim instructor to teach us how to swim to kind of avoid drowning in the first place. Drowning is a real thing, so we do definitely need lifeguards. Disease is a real thing, so we definitely need doctors and treatment and pharmaceuticals. However, how amazing would it be if we all learned, like you said, some of these habits and behaviors early on from a swim instructor, so that we don't have to worry about drowning as much later on in life. And I really love that metaphor. And so one of the big things that we really promote for families at home is really engaging kids in the kitchen and just in the whole process of food in general. One of my colleagues has this really great saying that watching cooking is not the same as doing cooking, like watching the Food Network or having your kids watch you cook in the kitchen. And an example of that I can give is after a day of watching the CrossFit Games, how much better is your personal skill set, right? I mean, You might be motivated and pumped up, but just watching Matt Frazier, crush an Olympic lift is not going to make I'm not going to PR by 20 pounds the next day. So what we need to do is give kids an understanding of where their food comes from, what goes into making food, preparing food, and just engaging them in that whole process. A lot of times families and schools focus on this eat aspect to nutrition, but not the prepare or the even before preparing. And obviously we want our food to taste good, but wouldn't it be great if we could get kids to see that all the foods that are good for us can taste really delicious if it's prepared right? and learn some lifelong skills along the way. There's been a lot of research that shows that by teaching kids to cook, they will shop differently, fill their plates differently, even consider their impact on the environment differently. And I can tell you firsthand, we've done a lot of different cooking and food literacy work with kids all through different age groups. One really great example is that we helped fund some aero gardens in a preschool that we work with. And they grew a bunch of different vegetables. They grew some tomatoes and cucumbers. They even tried to grow some strawberries. But what ended up growing most plentiful were leafy greens and herbs, which probably, if you ask most adults, does not strike them as what kids would want to eat or be most excited to eat. But because the kids were part of that seed to plant process, they planted the seeds, they observed the seeds growing, they harvested their greens and their herbs, we used them in cooking lessons. Every single kid in that class was willing to try those leafy greens and herbs.
Wow.
Very similarly, yeah, it was really, really impactful. And in fact, some of the kids even went home and requested that their families, try buying basil or add it to a dish. So I think that's, proof right there that kids, when they feel empowered with the decision making, they take ownership of that. On a flip side, when I was in the classroom, I did a whole year-long study with my co-teacher with the kids on cacao and cocoa farming, and we talked a lot about the bean to bar process of chocolate. And as a result, after the kids realized what a painstaking process it is to get one bar of chocolate, how much work goes into it, how a lot of the workers, the harvesters and farmers who harvest the cocoa never even taste chocolate in their entire life, started eating it more mindfully. They said, wow, I would gobble up a bar of chocolate, but now even just taking one bite, I think about how much went into that one chocolate bar. And their families would come back and say, my children are such, they're more conscious consumers. We'll look for certain labels on our chocolate when we buy it to make sure that it's environmentally sustainable. And so I think we underestimate the power of kids in wanting to know more, their curiosity, their intellect, their decision-making abilities. And there's just so much that we can involve them in and empower them with to make these healthy choices, as long as they're kind of, on the grounds with us from the very get-go.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. I think, like you said, the eat mentality around food for kids doesn't really work well, right? In schools, obviously, that's all they can do, right? They can't go in the kitchen and prepare the meal that they're going to eat for lunch at school. But, working on the forefront with schools to help that component of nutrition and food for children is extremely important. But then the preparative nature of food itself, which is not only just cooking the food in the kitchen, but also going to the grocery store, right? That's a part of preparation.
Yes, planning.
Exactly. Absolutely. Planning, preparation, going to the grocery store, and then also growing and seeing the process of foods actually being grown, in the soil of the United States, right? This is amazing. And I mean, everybody, views the world through the lens at which it's presented to them, right? So if you have this lens that you present to kids that they're just going to be given a plate and that's what they're expected to eat, and you don't teach them anything around what the planning and all these other things that New Jersey Health and Kids is currently doing to combat these issues, then they're going to view the world through the lens of that, the eat mentality around food, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things too so that's putting a lot on the kids and involving them, but what adults can also do in addition to fostering this love and curiosity around food is also to provide great environments, right? So when we go into schools and make observations about their feeding practices, this is particularly in early childhood, but can be applicable across all grades. What we're looking for are pretty simple things like, do the kids have enough time to eat, or are they rushed? Are they in early childhood? Best practices is actually family style sharing. So do the kids serve themselves from a family style table and dish? Are they being praised when they try new or healthy foods? Do you use reason and education rather than bribes or threats when you're talking about eating? Do you check in and kind of vocalize that inner voice we want them to develop about hunger and fullness cues? So a lot of it is modeling, creating a calm and safe environment for kids, offering tons of opportunities for kids to try new foods. A lot of people don't realize that it takes picky eaters between 10 to 20, usually upwards of 15 times to be exposed to a food before they're willing to accept it. And that actually goes for adults too. A lot of times parents or teachers will just give up, like, oh, well, I tried to offer them broccoli and they said no. So, we switched it to carrots. Well, ask them again and again and again, or simply put it on the table. Exposure doesn't mean offering it or force feeding it. And that's a big thing too. I know you guys use the intuitive eating approach. We don't want to look at food as a bribe or a reward or a threat. We don't want to moralize food. We want to normalize food. And I think those habits of mind that really help avoid things like eating disorders or weight stigma as they get older.
Yep. No, I agree completely. And building habit-based approaches around food, education around food is extremely, extremely important. And I think that, these are going to be great tips for moms and dads out there. I cannot sympathize. I don't have kids, and I've never really had a problem with getting kids to eat particular foods or anything like that. I've seen it, but I don't have kids to actually compare to. Yeah. So I ask parents ruthlessly, oh, okay, so how long has your kid been going to the grocery store?
Absolutely.
And I think that there's definitely a component of that there where they need to have their child with them at the grocery store and have them helping them make decisions around food choices and normalizing it. I think that that's really important for all households. I mean, all kids are picky eaters, right? Almost all households have to deal with this in some way or another, right? So I think having them involved more is an extremely helpful tip for a lot of parents out there.
Yeah, for sure. And just you are your kid's best model. So they're going to look to you to see, do you avoid vegetables? Do you make a face when you try something new? Fake it till you make it.
Right.
They're watching you. So, yep. I mean, I can say I'm not a parent either, but I can definitely tell you the difference in my students if they had a rushed lunch that wasn't a peaceful environment. I can tell you the difference between the mindset of a student who had a pretty crappy breakfast and one that had a pretty nourishing one. I could probably even tell you the difference of the mindset and attitudes towards foods being reflected in their kids' attitudes and reflections on food during their own lunchtime. So, what you say and what you do in front of your kids matters a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. They are huge role models, and I think these tips are really going to help household families and people that are able to connect with this podcast in that way, especially young children, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. So I do want to shift back to what we sort of started the conversation around, and especially with COVID-19 and the pandemic we're facing right now. It's no secret that, there are higher rates of death rates of people that get COVID, that have obesity and all these other things. So the statistics, at least the statistical analyses that I've seen most recent, are that about 0.5 to 0.8% of people that get coronavirus, COVID-19 specifically, are dying, right? But it's upwards of 20% that have obesity or other related immunity-based diseases that affect the immune system, right? So there are some folks out there that are outlining a narrative that these people that are experiencing obesity or that are obese or have some of these other, immunity-based diseases that affect the immune system, they don't have any personal responsibility, and we don't need to protect these people. I know that that's a lot to unpack, but can you speak a little bit to why that might not be the entire entire story, that these people just don't have any personal responsibility.
Yeah, so I mentioned the social determinants of health earlier. And, what I think is really important to take a look at there is what does that actually mean? Because then we can kind of talk about some root causes and then what that ends up looking like. So one of my favorite models for the social determinants of health comes from a group of researchers led by Dr. Ramirez, and this came out in 2008. And if you picture a tree, right, and you have your roots, your trunk, and then your branches and your leaves, the roots, for our metaphor here, are going to be things like quality healthcare, physical environment, quality schools, access to affordable, healthy foods, safe housing, sufficient income, et cetera, right? Then we have our trunk, which is more the social influence. So our bottom is more like environments and policies, things like that, infrastructure. Our trunk is more of our social influence. So that's like political leadership, community engagement, your social networks, the efficacy of the networks that you're in to do things. And then up top, our leaves and branches, those are things like our immune system, our mental health, our physical health, our stress, public safety, things like that. And if we aren't taking actions down in the roots, what we see are problems up in the leaves, just like a tree, right? If we don't have healthy roots in soil, then we see problems in our leaves. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening with COVID and obesity. So really scary. So you mentioned, the higher rates of people with obesity and hospitalization due to COVID. But even in kids, patients that are younger than 60, those with obesity were still twice as likely to be hospitalized and 1.8 times more to need critical care. And most of these people are people of color. And a lot of this is linking, there's been lots of research going back and forth about the links between COVID and food insecurity, as well as social isolation. So food insecurity definitely got worse due to COVID. People lost their jobs, people lost access to food. Some people were due to either a compromised immune system of themselves or someone in the household, or maybe because of illness themselves weren't able to get to the store. But what's crazy is that I mentioned that 14 million children were food insecure as of June 2020. But in 2018, we had 5.6 times less as many children who were food insecure. So definitely there's an issue here between our pandemic and child hunger, certainly having to do with lower wage jobs. Also, a lot of people who are, on the front lines, they are lacking access. Our essential workers, they are the ones who are being exposed to the disease more. They're more vulnerable to infection, but they're also the same people who do not have the wages, benefits, and conditions, working conditions, to really support their families or to avoid some of these risks. So a lot of it is environmental, and a lot, as you mentioned, this slow pandemic of COVID is really obesity. The more that we're self-isolating and having these more structural and infrastructural issues relating to access and socioeconomics, coupled with some of these more social isolating issues, that trunk part of the tree, where we're seeking out more comfort foods and maybe some easier to prepare foods like takeout and fast food. I think it's very concerning what the implications for the lack of physical activity and the issues of malnutrition will be as we come out of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, it almost seems like that's where the intersection happens, right? Between COVID-19 and obesity. Yeah. And I think that it's a very complex issue. I know that when it comes to staying home and having to quarantine, especially for those that have lost their jobs, and as you said, increases food insecurity, it's an issue on its own. And then also, going out and about, if you somehow are asymptomatic and have COVID-19, and spreading the virus to others is also an issue. So I seen something recently about this, and I think it's the COVID-19 in and of itself is sort of at least I think I heard this from you actually when we were talking. You basically said that COVID-19 is like sort of the quick killer of people, whereas obesity is the slow killer. It just so happens that obviously people that are contracting the virus that have obesity are 20 times more likely to die at least at this stage, right? So I hope that people out there at least understand that their obesity in and of itself, and being overweight and having these other comorbidity-based immunity-affecting diseases are like a long-term thing. And to eradicate COVID, we need something short-term at this time. So everyone is not going to start exercising 5-6 days a week and get in shape in 12 weeks, right? Right. What's a lot easier are some of the other approaches that have been taken, which includes quarantining the best that you can, wearing social distancing, wearing masks, and then a vaccine, right? And I think that everything comes down to risks at the end of the day. And I think people just need to be smart about that. But I do hope that this is the light that people needed, that have struggled with their weight and some other things in regards to health, to get their act together and get the help that they need, the resources that they need, or the self-determination that they need to make small incremental improvements in their lifestyle, right? Yeah.
Another really interesting statistic that I saw and kind of sad was, because so many kids are out of school, that's like a main source for a lot of kids to get their nutritious meals, right? But also that's for a lot of kids where they're getting their physical activity either via their gym classes or recess. And there was a study that was conducted that predicted 1.2 million new cases of childhood obesity nationwide if schools remain closed through 2020. And that is really scary. And I think about, schools being closed. I don't know what the best answer is. As a former teacher, I am very conflicted where I stand with this. But, you think about that coupled with those access to school meals for kids. And then also just the simple, for a lot of kids, school is a safe haven for them. I think sometimes homes can be very stressful. I think homes during COVID for everyone were very stressful. If you factor in the idea of someone in your home having COVID, a chronic disease, or not being able to put food on your table, that's a stressful situation. Going hungry is a stressful situation. So there's also this mental health aspect and physical activity aspect that I think COVID is also impacting to a great extent as well.
Yeah, it definitely is super conflicting, and it's good to actually hear some numbers. I know that a lot of people out there are just irresponsible. Like the governor of Florida, in my personal opinion, is just like, I'm just going to open up things because people are depressed. But he actually has no numbers to conclude that people are dying because of depression at a higher mortality rate than that of COVID-19 or whatever it is. He's just kind of he's winging it. It's his opinion. Right. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree one way or another. Like I said, it's super conflicting whether how much we should be open and managing the risks of COVID-19 and of course obesity and stalemate and no physical activity. But the answer truly is in the numbers, right? And understanding, okay, this many more people have become depressed. This many more people have committed suicide. This many more people have, based on their BMI, have been concluded to go from a high body weight to being actually a part of the obesity statistic. And then obviously all the things related to children as well that you've already alluded to. So I think more statistics do need to come out you know, and I think obviously there are also extremes on the other end, like California that are shutting down, but then also like their governors are doing whatever the hell they want. So I think that a better understanding of the statistics as what are the detriments of quarantining to such a strict or nth degree, let's call it, versus, you know, how many lives we're actually saving as a part of the pandemic. For that, I mean, I think it goes without saying, at least for myself, that if you do go out, you should do your best to protect others by wearing a mask and trying to stay socially distant from people. But it doesn't mean that maybe you need to never go out again or not go out to do things that you might want to do in a particular setting. And if you do feel any symptoms at all, stay home, right?
Absolutely.
In general. So super complex topic. Obviously we don't have all the answers, but it's just good to get some insight from the school perspective, because I know that this was something we didn't think that we were going to even have to deal with at the start of the pandemic. We're like, okay, is there going to be a second wave? And it's been shown that like with the Spanish flu, there were 4 separate waves, the second wave killing more than the first. Right.
Wow.
So we may not be even out of the woods yet. So in terms of what the answers actually are, I hope that there are people actually coming up with real statistics besides the death rate and the hospitalization rate, you know, for children that are, you know, facing some of these other issues, you know, just in the home setting through quarantine and everything else.
Definitely.
So, yeah. All right, Erin, I think we gave a lot of people, maybe we gave people more to think about than actual answers for some stuff, but still like super interesting. You know, these are complex problems, and I think that it's an interesting time to be alive. And I really appreciate you coming on today and talking about this. I think that a lot of parents struggle both in, you know, low income areas as well as middle class to higher income areas with teaching, you know, food to and just nutrition to their kids and also to themselves, right? Because they don't have the education around what's good and what's not, and what type of diet and nutrition information they should be following. So yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a pleasure to have you on, and we hope to have you on again.
Thank you so much, Justin. I had a great time talking with you.
Absolutely, Erin. Talk to you soon.
It's science.
Thank you for listening to the podcast today. We hope you enjoyed it. Keep tuning in every week for more incredible guests and ways to reach your max potential, both physically and mentally. Please subscribe on iTunes or your preferred podcast app and let us know if you liked this episode. Don't forget to check us out at consistencybreedsgrowth.com or on Instagram at CBG_online_sports for details on upcoming nutrition challenges or one-on-one coaching for weight loss, wellness, or performance. Also, feel free to join our free Facebook page at www.facebook.com/groups/CBG Nutrition Tribe.